I hope all you gentlemen and gentlewomen are having a great day, as I've got a build for you. This is my perfected mana stacking Archmage Hierophant. This build is centered around the Archmage support gem, combined with passives such as Sanctuary of Thought to allow us to scale our mana into both damage and defense. This build has blown my expectations out of the water, and I believe this is one of, if not the strongest jack of all trades build in the league. Being able to clear T17s with ease, destroy uber bosses, all while having great defences on a shoestring budget. Now this build has two variants, a more budget version that costs about 5 divines, and a more expensive version that is more 20 to 40 div. And upgrade wise brings you to a level where your next upgrade is Mage Blood. The great thing about the budget variant is you don't actually lose that much damage or defense to get to the low cost. Now we have introductions out of the way, let's talk about the skill gems. One of the best things about this build is that it allows you to use almost any non-damage over time spell effectively. So while I will be going into more detail about the most effective gems to use, if you want to play with one that I haven't brought up, you're free to use it and it will be effective. Now the skill gems will slightly vary depending on what skill you're using. For most skills, all you have to change is your main gem and maybe a support gem. However, for Vortex of Projection plus Ice Nova of Frostbolts, we will need a setup to generate Frostbolt projectiles. Any changes to the gem setup for each skill will be included in the POB. First of all, in every single POB we will be running a curse setup using Arcanist Brand to apply Assassin's Mark, Conductivity and Punishment. These will increase our crit attributes, reduce enemies' res and increase enemy damage taken respectively. We will also be using Arcane Cloaked, linked with more duration and automation in every POB. Arcane Cloak is a buff that spends a percentage of our mana to grant us a buff that increases our damage, as well as giving us a defensive shield that acts as an extra HP pool. Next up we will be running Eternal Blessing plus Purity of Elements. While there are other offensive auras, they don't really provide more than 20% more damage, whereas Purity of Elements solves our resistances and gives us ailment immunity, which allows us to gear in a way that will give us more than 20% increased damage. Also in the same link as our Purity of Elements we will run Sigil of Power, which is a buff you have to activate and it provides increased damage as well as less damage taken while you are in the area. For our second to last non-6 link we will run Clarity plus Arrogance. This is entirely for our Watcher's Eye buff, so we will run it at level 1. We will also use Frost Shield, which is another stationary buff, providing a shield as well as increased crit chance while we're in the area. Both Frost Shield plus Sigil of Power will have enough duration that we can have 100% uptime. In our last socket of this 4 link we will either run Flame Dash or Frostblink of Wintry Blast. Flame Dash is a bonus movement skill that has more range than Frostblink and we will be using this when our main skill doesn't need a Frostbolt setup for support. Finally, for the last 4 link, we will use a setup to generate Frostbolts if we're using Ice Nova of Frostbolts or Vortex of Projections. If we're using any other skill, we will instead link Frostblink of Wintry Blast with faster casting, Archmage and Arcane Surge. For our main skill support gem we will use Power Charge on crit, Spell Echo, Archmage and increased critical hit damage for all skills. Our 5th link will either be Intensify or Pinpoint, and our final link will of course be the skill we intend to use as our main damage source. First off, let's talk about my personal favourite skill, that being Ball Lightning of Orbiting. This skill is a great all-rounder in my opinion and the best skill for farming bosses. While other skills might have higher damage potential, this skill has the most consistent damage and the easiest way to apply it. This skill excels with content such as strong boxes, as you can precast your Ball Lightning before opening the boxes and they will kill all enemies as they spawn around you. While this skill is amazing, it does have some cons such as the short range and it does take a little bit of time to reach full DPS. If you decide to use this skill, make sure your 5th link is Pinpoint and also to unspec from the maximum intensify, as if you have this located, it will fire 0 projectiles. The next 5 skills will all use intensify as their 5th link, and I'm stating this now so I don't have to keep repeating myself. For our next skill, I'll be talking about Vortex of Projection. This skill has the highest damage potential out of all self-cast skills and a ridiculously large AoE for this build that will clear screens. Now, while this sounds great, and it is, the skill does have some limitations, mainly getting the ideal overlap combined with needing ways of generating frostbolts. For this skill, we generate frostbolts with a self-cast setup using frostbolt, linked with unleash, greater volley, and slower projectiles. The 2-button playstyle might put a lot of people off, but we have plenty of alternative skills to use. Next up, we have Ice Nova of Frostbolt. This is a skill that is very similar to Vortex of Projection with a decent bit lower damage, however it doesn't consume the frostbolts, which allows us to generate them with a setup using Kitava's Thirst. This is a helmet that has a 50% chance to trigger a skill when we spend 200 mana, and because we spend so much per second, we will trigger this quite often. If we stock it in Frostbolt, slow projectiles, and greater volley, this will be more than enough to generate the Frostbolt, while also leaving us room to put in Feeble on the helmet, which will cause enemies to deal less damage. Now, while the skill has pleasantly surprised me in both terms of damage and clear, it does have some issues. The biggest one is that it requires you to use a Frostbolt setup and give up your helmet, which lowers your mana as well as energy shield, as the helmet we're using now gives us quite a bit of both. Also, this is a very mana hungry setup that while you can sustain with the basic POB, I would recommend using a Watcher's Eye with the Clarity mana mod shown on screen now. Firestorm is also an incredible skill to use. There's not much to say about this as it's a very simple playstyle. It's just a big projectile that does a lot of damage in a very wide AoE. It's fun to use, and while not the best anything, it is a perfectly good option to farm T17s with a very smooth experience. Blazing Salvo, similarly to Firestorm, is also a very good all-arounder. However, I do prefer Firestorm. There is one caveat with this skill. So, if you're using Nimish, which is a ring that costs about double this build's budget, then Blazing Salvo does incredible boss DPS. However, this is ridiculously expensive, and also Ball Lightning does similar DPS without needing such an expensive item. Finally, for my last recommendation, I will go with Crackling Lance. This is an AoE lightning skill that does a lightning projectile, well not a projectile, a lightning AoE in a large area where you cast it. Now, the clear for this skill is amazing, and I quite enjoy it for just basic content. However, it has got one issue: the boss DPS is quite low, so if you do decide to use this skill, I wouldn't really use this on content such as T17s, and I would preferably use this on easier content, maybe T16s, T16s.5. For this segment, I will be going over the gear and skill tree, starting off with the max version, then moving on to the more budget version. As for the budget version, I will not be repeating the skills and items. I've kept the same, rather I will go over what has changed to reduce the budget, as fundamentally these two versions are the same builds, just slightly different to reduce the cost. We start the skill tree over with the starting Templar node, pathing over here to grab a jewel slot, as well as over here so we can grab this mana node here, this elemental damage cluster here, and this mana node here. This mana node here is very important as it gives us our first bit of reduced cost, as well as grabbing the mastery for even more reduced cost. We also grab these two nodes here so we can get the energy shield mastery. This build has a bit of issues with stun, so this helps out a lot. Then we path over here so we can grab this Militant Faith and Unnatural Instinct combo. Militant Faith is a jewel that does two things. First of all, it gives us devotion on the passives like this, and it also changes a keystone to be inner conviction. Now, what's good about devotion is this gives us two buffs: 4% increased elemental damage per point and 1% reduced mana cost per 10 devotion. Now, we have 180 devotion and we get this through Unnatural Instinct, which allocates small passives in a radius. However, these connected passives grant nothing. Now what makes this combo really good is these allocated passives in the radius will get bonus devotion from Militant Faith, meaning we have a total of 180 devotion. This 180 devotion will give us 72% increased elemental damage, as well as 18% reduced mana cost. Now this reduced mana cost is additive with all our other bonuses, such as the Dreamer node and the Mastery over here. We also grab a bit more reduced mana cost over here with these 3 nodes, and this totals out to 56% reduced mana cost, over halving the cost of our skills. Now Militant Faith also gives us Inner Conviction. Inner Conviction gives us 3% more spell damage per power charge, with the downside of not gaining frenzy charges. Now because we stack 10 power charges, this gives us 30% more damage, and the downside we alleviate with our boots in the gear section, but I will talk more about that later. For Militant Faith you need 3 things on it: reduce mana cost of skills, elemental damage, and you need to make sure it's Dominus, as if it is not converted by High Templar Dominus you will not get Militant Inner Conviction, and Inner Conviction is a very large chunk of more damage. Over here on the skill tree we've already talked about the reduced mana cost, but we are running Red Nightmare. Red Nightmare gives our resistance nodes of fire and all res also give block at 50% of the value. On the tree we can get 8% all res here from Faith and Steel and 12% from Holy Dominion. This gives us 10% chance to block. However, we can get even more with our small nodes. Using tattoos we can change these 10 strength nodes to be 6 fire res. With 4 nodes that gives us 12% extra block chance, totaling out to be 22% chance to block from 1 duel. This is important for capping our block chance out, at least on the maxed out version. For the budget version we will be changing how we do the block, because this is actually a little bit expensive. Moving on, we move over here. This gives us life and ES. You might notice that we're not having much life on the tree, and that is because we split our HP pool into 3 segments: mana, life and energy shield. Because of our ascendancy we get mind over matter. This means 40% of damage is taken from mana before life, and mana effectively acts as an extra HP pool. Combine that with energy shield as well as life, and our damage is split across 3 avenues. This is good for defenses, but it does make it a bit hard to scale our actual HP pools, as if we scale just life we're really only scaling about 1/3 of our HP pools. However, this cluster over here gives us both life and energy shield, meaning it's really good. It also allows us to get this block node, and this spell block is very efficient. It also gives us a mastery for 1% chance to block spell damage per 5% chance to block attack damage. You will need this cluster to cap your spell block. It also gives us max spell block and recover ES when you block spell damage, which is very nice for survivability. We also grab this spell block node for similar reason, as this helps capping our spell block. This mastery is also important for capping our attack block. The cluster over here is also very important, as it gives us 2 main things: Doriani's Lesson, which gives us elemental damage leached as life, and Storm Drinker, which gives us lightning damage leached as ES. This will provide recovery for both our life and ES, and is the source of leech we have for the build. We also grab Scintillating Ideas, as we can have 3 passives, and this is the best 3rd option. Finally, in this segment of the build we grab the power charge node over here, as well as more block, more mana, and these nodes. This will give us more spell block, this will give us spell damage per max mana, and this Light of Meaning is very cheap and will give us a bunch of flat mana, as it grants our passives +5 to maximum mana. Now I'm going to talk about the frenzy charge a bit more. We get 3 frenzy charges on the tree. one over here, and we can anoint another one over here. Frenzy charges give us crit chance, which is a very good way of scaling our damage as we have an absurd 450% crit multiplier. And because we are scaling frenzy charges, we grab this node over here, giving 5% crit multi per power charge, 8% crit per power charge, as well as 3% increased damage per frenzy, power or endurance charge. Finally, we have 2 more jewels. We get a rare one here. This gives us crit multi and max mana and just gives us much more damage. And finally, we use Rational Doctrine. This creates Profane Ground when we deal a critical hit if int is our highest attribute, and seeing as int is our highest attribute, this will create Profane Ground when we deal a crit. Now what Profane Ground does is it gives us 100% increased crit chance as well as 10% increased curse effect, which is very nice for damage. Finally, for our Ascendancy, we will be grabbing Divine Guidance for more mana, as well as Transfiguration of Mind to turn our max mana increases into damage. It also gives us 10% of damage is taken from mana before life, which is very nice for defenses. Sanctuary of Thought is incredibly important for this build. It gives us more mana regen, which helps with keeping our mana sustained. It gives us 20% max mana as extra energy shield, which is incredible for defenses, and this node alone is providing 30% of our energy shield. Finally, and most importantly, it gives us area of effect for 50 unreserved mana. This caps out at 100% and is incredibly useful for both clear and single target damage, as there is a lot of skills that have overlaps that this skill enables. Next up, we grab Arcane Blessing. This gives our Arcane Surge 20% more spell damage to you, and it can be scaled by increased effects of Arcane Surge. We grab increased effect of Arcane Surge over here with these 3 nodes. Finally, we grab Conviction of Power. This is very nice for both damage and survivability. The 4 minimum endurance charges reduce the damage taken from elemental and physical damage by 16%, and the +1 max power charge and endurance charge give us a nice bit of defense as well as a nice bit of damage, as we do stack power charges, and that gives us 50% crit per power charge as well as other benefits that we spec into. For our weapons, we're using Void Battery in our main hand. This gives us +1 maximum power charges as well as 25% increased spell damage per power charge. Because we are power charge stacking, this is the best options in terms of damage. For shield, we're using a rare one with plus maximum power charge. You don't need a specific base for this one, and the one I'm using in the build cost me about 40c. For mods, you want to get both attack block and spell block. You can self-craft this shield by using Essences of Loathing until you get T1 spell block, as the essence guarantees attack block. Our helmet will be Mind Spiral. This gives us up to 120 maximum mana, as well as up to 15% of our mana as energy shield. Because we stack mana, this is incredible for both damage and defense. We will also be using +1 power charge corruption on this helmet, which is ridiculously cheap, at least right now. For our body armor, we will be using Cloak of Defiance. This gives us Mind over Matter, firstly, which means we don't need to path to that on the tree. Mind over Matter allows us to use our mana to protect our life, turning mana into an extra HP pool. This item also gives us some other nice mana stacking bonuses, such as maximum mana and mana regen. For the endgame version, we will be using the Foulborn version of this, replacing evasion and energy shield with mana gained as energy shield. For our gloves, we will be using Algo Mortis. This gives us more damage when we are close to enemies. It being a cheap unique also allows us to get a corrupt on the cheap. In this instance, we are using Elemental Weakness for more damage. However, if you want more survivability, I would go for Enfeeble. The boots are a very important part of the build, and they allow us to use frenzy charges with Inner Conviction. Frenzy charges give us 4% more damage, cast speed and attack speed per charge. We will stack 10 frenzy charges on this build, giving us 40% more damage and 40% increased cast speed, massively increasing our damage. For our amulet, we will use Badge of the Brotherhood. This allows us to gain maximum frenzy charges equal to maximum power charges. This allows us to get 10 maximum frenzy charges. Also make sure to anoint your amulet with infuse to increase your maximum power charge limit by 1. For our rings, firstly we will use anathema to get our max curse limit equal to our maximum power charges. This is what allows us to use 4 curses on the build. This ring massively increases our damage and is very important as curses are ridiculously powerful from boosting our damage. For our second ring, we'll be using a rare one. Make sure to have dexterity, as much chaos as possible, and an open suffix so you can craft minimum endurance charges. For our belt, we will use Darkness Enthroned. This gives us 2 Abyssal Jewel slots and increases the Abyssal Jewel's effects in them up to double. For your Abyssal Jewels, you want mana, most importantly, and the other mods can depend on what you're lacking and can fill in gaps in attributes, resistances, or even chaos res. However, if you have them all sorted out, the best mods to look for are mods such as crit multi, cast speed, and cast speed when you deal a crit. Finally, for our graphs, we'll be using 2 Esh graphs as they can roll with maximum mana as a mod up to 14%. While one of them is not that important in the skill it uses, the other is incredibly important as we would want Overcharge Sinews. This will increase our maximum damage by up to 20% when we deal a crit. Due to the fact that our minimum and maximum damage given by Archmage is the same, this is effectively 20% more damage to the build. As for the gear and the skills that have changed, I'm going to quickly go over both for the budget POB. The real biggest change is we remove points over here, we move our Militant Faith over here, and to compensate, and we also get rid of the Red Nightmare. And to compensate for that, we just put points over here to grab some extra attack block, as well as reduced mana cost. For the cluster, we get rid of a passive and just take Stormdrinker and Doriani's. And for the expensive jewels, we just replace them with rare ones with mana, crit multi, and just anything that solves any of the issues we have in terms of attributes, resistance, or crit multi if we have the spare room. As for the gear, there's not much that changes either. We just run a regular Cloak of Defiance. For the amulet, we change our anoint to as the mountain. This gives us block and lets us cap our block chance even on the budget version. Finally, we get a slightly worse Darkness Enthroned as they drastically decrease in price as you reduce the effects, even though going from 90 to 85 isn't that big of a difference for your build. It does make a massive difference in terms of cost. For the final segment of the video, I will go over a brief rundown of how we scale both defense and offense. In terms of damage scaling, first we use our mana to scale flat damage using Archmage. We also get a percentage damage increase from mana due to Divine Guidance, giving us Transfiguration of Mind. Finally, Prodigal Perfection gives us spell damage based on our max mana. This build also heavily invests into power charges. Power charges give us 50% increased critical hit chance per charge. Due to the fact we have 10, this gives us 500% increased crit chance. We further invest into crit chance with items such as Rational Doctrine and Bottled Faith. This combined with our crit multi gives us a 97% chance to crit with an absurd crit multi of 550%. Moving back onto power charges, they don't just give us crit chance, but also with Inner Conviction they give us 3% more damage per charge, totaling 30% more damage. With Void Battery we can cause our power charges to also scale our spell damage by 25% per charge, totaling to 250%. Next up we use Ralakesh and Patience combined with Badge of the Brotherhood to gain Frenzy Charge equal to our power charges. Frenzy Charges give us 4% more damage and 4% increased cast speed per charge, totaling to 40% more damage as well as 40% increased cast speed. Moving on, we have a curse setup enabled by the maximum curses that are given by Anathema. These curses include Conductivity for lowering enemy lightning res, Punishment to cause enemies to take increased damage when they are on low life, Assassin Mark to further enhance our crit, and Ellie Weakness to further reduce enemy resistances. These curses combined over double our damage and are incredibly important for the build. We also grab sources of generic increased damage through the tree, with the biggest sources being Militant Faith, providing 4% increased LE damage per 10 devotion. Due to the fact we have 180 devotion, this gives us 72% increased LE damage. Finally, our Eschgraphs gives us up to 20% more damage when fully stacked. As for defenses, we first scale our energy shield through our mana, using sources of maximum mana gained as energy shield, from Sanctuary Fort giving 20%, Watcher's Eye mod giving 10%, and finally Cloak of Defiance giving us 20%, totaling to 50% of our mana gained as energy shield. We also use mana as our defense through Mind Over Matter. Combined with Divine Guidance, this gives us 50% of our damage taken from our mana before life. Finally, we scale endurance charges, gaining 4 from our ascendancy, as well as 1 from a skill point on the tree and a ringcraft. This gives us 5 endurance charges and totals to 20% reduced elemental and physical damage taken. Finally, we scale both spell and attack block, capping both out and giving us a great defensive shell. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. I've got many more plans for builds this league, and hopefully I will get them out much faster as I have a good currency base, so it really is just getting the video edited and other such things such as the POBs. Also, if you like the video, like. If you want to see more, subscribe. And if you've got any questions, of course this is the most important thing, comment and I will respond.